rant@gmail.com.
You can't handle the truth.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
You have offended my family.
Hey, this is great, man.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
I know nothing.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
We don't need no stinking budget.
Homosexuality, no immorality in general.
How in the century you have slurred the meaning of the words we, the people.
Be warned, this is not your mother's marijuana.
You could ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
I want to ask you a bunch of questions. I want to have them answered immediately.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant. Welcome back, 45 after the hour, and today the rant is inspired by a story written by Radley Balko. It's up on the Washington Post in The Watch, and it's entitled The Inhumanity of How We Incarcerate. Got the link posted up in our chat room if you'd like to follow along. It begins with the story of a man killed by the North Carolina prison system. Michael Anthony Kerr spent the last 5 days of his life handcuffed in a prison cell, unresponsive, off his mental health medication, and lying in his feces and urine. An hour or two before the former Army sergeant died, officials at Alexander Correctional Institution put him into a wheelchair and drove him 2.5 hours east to a prison hospital in Raleigh. When Kerr, age 53, arrived at Central Prison, his body was cold. Somewhere between Taylorsville and Raleigh, as the prison vehicle passed emergency rooms at 8 hospitals, Kerr died of dehydration. Brenda Lyles, his sister, said, quote, "They treated him like a dog," end quote. The story gives some background on Kerr, explaining that circumstances in the man's life certainly broke him. Kerr was born in Sampson County in southeastern North Carolina in 1960 to a family of 6 boys and 6 girls. He joined the Army in 1979, serving in an artillery unit. After an honorable discharge in 1991 from Fort Sill, he sold real estate in Lawton, Oklahoma, and was pastor of the Faith Temple Church. While an intensely religious man, he began getting in trouble with the law in 1995 with a string of larceny convictions and served 10 months in prison. Lyles, his sister, said Kerr began falling apart after 2 of his sons were murdered in Sampson County. Anthony Kerr in Harrells in May 2007, and Gabriel Kerr in a Garland juke joint in June 2008. That's when he began to have those nervous breakdowns, Lyles said. He had 2 or 3. In prison, Kerr was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a condition in which the person experiences schizophrenia symptoms such as delusions or hallucinations, as well as mood disorders such as mania or depression. Prison officials put Kerr into solitary confinement in February. For several weeks, guards observed him standing, sitting, or sleeping, according to a prison log. Sometimes he lay on the floor singing. At other times, he kicked, banged, or pecked on his cell door. On 4 occasions, he plugged up his sink to flood the cell, and guards periodically cut the water off. He was held in full restraints or handcuffs for days at a time. So, we have a man who's put into prison, clearly mentally ill, and the state of North Carolina doesn't give him any treatment, doesn't provide him with mental health medication, and puts him in solitary confinement. And then when he acts out as, come on, the guy's schizoaffective, he's going to act out. They put him in cuffs, they chain him down, and they turn off his water. And then the guy dies of dehydration. Now, the state of North Carolina doesn't particularly like the attention of having an inmate die of dehydration. But they're very, very, very reluctant to let anyone outside of their little circle do any investigation. This again from the News Observer story in North Carolina. The State Department of Public Safety has released almost no information to the public on Kerr's March 12th death. Secretary of Public Safety Frank Perry declined to discuss the facts of the case, but said he called in the State Bureau of Investigation to look into the death. Other state agencies have faced obstacles investigating the case. An agent for the State Bureau of Investigation had to get a court order to obtain Kerr's records. As the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner conducted an autopsy, prison officials' help was so minimal that the pathologist could not determine the manner of death, accident, suicide, or homicide. Days after the autopsy was released and the lack of cooperation became public, the U.S. Attorney in Raleigh opened a grand jury investigation of the death. Folks, in America, our prisons have become our de facto mental health wards. I'm old enough to remember, I was a teenager, but I'm old enough to remember when Ronald Reagan shut down most of what was our mental health treatment facilities in this country. Shut down the money to treat these people with treatable mental illnesses. And these people with mental illnesses, of course, often end up homeless because, as my wife is fond of saying, when you see the guy on the street corner pushing a garbage or pushing a shopping cart full of garbage, having a conversation with the telephone pole, he's not exactly the most employable person on the street. So these people end up homeless, they end up unemployed, and eventually end up committing some sort of crime that leads them into the criminal justice system. And from there, they end up with public defenders, very little support, very little help, unable to defend themselves. They end up in prison, where prison guards make lousy psychiatrists. This is not an isolated incident. You may recall the story of Darren Rainy. He was a mentally ill inmate in Florida. And as he acted up and he would, shit all over the place, piss all over the place, wipe it all over the place, right? To punish him, the guards there in Florida locked him in a scalding hot shower. His skin was boiled off his bones. There was also allegations by former employees that the Dade County facility that allowed that to happen made a sport of brutalizing the mentally ill. There's the case of Jerome Murdo, who died of heat exposure when he was left unattended for hours in a cell at Rikers Island in the mentally ill ward, despite the fact that the prison officials at Rikers knew there was a heating unit malfunction that was raising the temperature in the cells to dangerously high levels. There's the case of Christopher Lopez, a schizophrenic man in Colorado who suffered 2 seizures and died on the floor of his prison cell while guards allegedly mocked and laughed at him. They waited 1.5 years before they even bothered to report his death. We have seen so many in-custody deaths recently that are exposing the shoddy prison conditions and the shocking mental and medical health treatment that we're allowing to happen in America. Cases in Maine, San Diego, Florida, Louisville, Alaska, California, in Pennsylvania, among other places, that include Cook County, Illinois, Orleans Parish, Louisiana, upstate New York, Idaho, and Mississippi. We've got allegations where prison guards are staging gladiatorial combat, staged fights and competitions between the inmates, contests that the guards would call, quote, the Retard Olympics, end quote. So it gives you some idea how inured and how much these guards have in the way of compassion toward the mentally ill, and how much they just accept the brutality toward prisoners as run of the mill. And to some respect, paint that as what's appropriate. And who's to blame them when we look at how we as a society think of prison? We just accept violence in prison. We just accept rape in prison. Prison rape is a standard throwaway sitcom joke in this country. There was actually a prison rape joke in SpongeBob SquarePants, people. That's how accepting we are of it. And we think of it as, well, that's just part of the punishment. Prison shouldn't be a great place to be, right? So, if you're afraid of getting raped by Bubba in the shower or beaten up by the Aryan Nation gang or whatever, well, that's just part of the prison. We don't want them to enjoy prison. To the point where people wish this. They wish this on people. Well, I sure hope he doesn't drop the soap when he goes to prison, goes to the big house. That's just abominable in this country. And to see it reflected from the county and city jail level all the way to the top echelons of our Department of Defense and our executive department, countenancing torture in our names and extraordinary renditions in our names, it's no surprise that prisoners get treated this way in this country. We've got more humanity, we've got more compassion for a dog left in a car on a hot day in a mall parking lot than we do for a human being locked in a prison cell. And that's a very sad indictment of this country and our values, our supposedly Christian nation values. For every person out there who calls themselves a Christian, and I don't number myself in that group, but for those of you who do, I seem to recall some quote about how you treat the least of these, so you are treating me, as said by Jesus. Well, if that's the case, Jesus ain't going to be very happy about how we've been treating the least of these. Now, I know some people get in this, we don't be soft on crime. What do we want to give them? Cable television and Barca loungers and blah, 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 blah. No. But I also believe that cages for human beings should be reserved as a last resort for those people that if they were not in a cage, they would cause harm to other people. There is so much about our incarceration in this country, this mass incarceration, that we need to get over in this country. And there's so many elements of our society that are against it, from the corporations that make use of cheap 17 cents an hour prison labor that basically makes up for the lack of slave labor in this country, that this country was founded on, that this empire was built upon. From that level to the cable news networks that run lockup, lockout, prison, cops, whatever the hell the show is that I don't watch, hour after hour after hour, that make it normal, make it seem regular for us to be living in this police state. There's so much to uncover in this. And I firmly believe that this police industrial complex, this prison industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, cannot be sustained without the prohibition on marijuana. And that's why we continue to see, despite all evidence, all science, all common sense to the contrary, so many people in positions of power still holding on to the idea of prohibiting something far safer than alcohol. Without the easy arrests and that constant flow of marijuana users, there's not enough profit in prisons, in policing, in asset forfeiture to make it worth their while. And that's why they're so desperately afraid of the momentum we've got now with marijuana legalization. You know, a lot of people ask, gosh, with so much support for legalization, how come the politicians aren't coming around? Well, folks, it's because this is a country of we the people, a country that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. The problem is, corporations are people, my friend, and their money is free speech. The corporate people don't like legalization so much, and their free speech, up to now, has been a lot louder than ours. All that's changing. and we're glad to be a part of it here at 420 Radio. Thanks for joining us, folks. That's all the time we got for Hour 1, but stay tuned for Hour 2. Toker Talk Radio is next. I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it.